Hey everybody, welcome back. I'm Seth Monahan, a guy who is still paying off his college loans from the 90s, and this is video number 31 in my series on classical harmony and counterpoint. Today's topic is, well, it's that word right there in the middle of your screen. Big yellow letters. I'm sure you can read it. And to talk about, this thing, we have to go back to a passage we saw in the last video. This is the opening of Mozart's F major piano sonata, and it shows two things we learned about recently. The progression itself is a complete functional cycle laid out over a tonic pedal. Tonic, predominant, dominant, tonic. We learned about those in video 29. And then the 4 chord in that progression, the predominant, is prepared by a 5-7 of 4, a chord we learned about in video 30. So here's how the whole thing sounds. Well, together, those 5 chords give us an idiom that was so popular in the 1700s that someone eventually took the trouble to name it. And look, the name is right there at the top of your screen, so you obviously don't need me to say it. Instead, let's just talk about how the thing works, okay? So first, it always starts and ends on tonic in root position. And there's always a tonic pedal under the whole thing. Second, it always has a full functional cycle, so there's always going to be a predominant and a dominant. Third, the predominant area always starts with 4 and is always preceded by an applied chord to 4. So the version on screen sounds like this. But there are little variations of this as well. The second chord is usually 5-7 of 4, but sometimes it's 7 diminished 7 of 4 instead. The 4 can be the only predominant, or it can go to another predominant chord, like 2 or even minor 4. And then the dominant slot can really be almost any chord with a dominant function. Today we're going to see 5-7, 7 diminished, and 7 diminished 7. And finally, like a lot of pedal point progressions we've already seen, this one has a signature upper voice motion, which you can see right here. Scale degrees 1, lowered 7, 6, then raised 7, and back to tonic. I call this top voice motion the Q line, which is admittedly pretty geeky, but the Q, you'll notice, comes from the idiom's name, which is still right there, right at the top of the screen. It's not a secret. I'm not hiding anything from you. I just don't want to have to... Okay, look, I'm sorry. Look, I'll say it. The name of the idiom is the quiescenza. 4 syllables, quiescenza. Now, like I said before, this thing was all the rage in the mid-1700s. But it only got named in the early 2000s thanks to this guy, a brilliant scholar whose work I very much admire. It's just that... Well, okay, it's not just that students can't ever remember the name on their own. The problem is that quiescenza sounds like the kind of name a certain type of person would give to their cat. And this person who names their cat Quiescenza, we immediately know 3 things about them. 1, they're very, very lonely. 2, they have secrecy issues. The blinds are always down, the doors are always locked. And 3, well, they dress the cat up like a pageant princess. Look, you know I'm right, and you know the kinds of nicknames this person utters in secret. Quiescenza, my delectable little love truffle. Quiescenza, my scrumptious kissy muffin. All the usual suspects. And I wouldn't blame you if you found all this rather troubling because it's creepy! That's why nobody likes to talk about this. But it happens. I know it and you know it. And it's just painful to see these majestic predators brought so low. I'm sorry, this is hard to talk about. Let's just move on here. So back in video 29, we learned that tonic pedal points tend to come either at the very beginnings of pieces or at the very ends of sections, usually after a big authentic cadence. This is true of the quiescenza as well. But we can start by distinguishing between what I call opening quiescenzas and closing quiescenzas. So let's start with the closing quiescenzas. They have a few things in common. They tend to happen twice in a row rather than once, and they tend to have a very audible cue line. And like a lot of material that comes right after cadences, they tend to sound kind of generic, more like filler material than any kind of a proper theme. Here is a closing quiescenza from the end of Haydn's Mercury Symphony. We're in E flat major here, and you can see the cue line pretty clearly right at the top of the texture. Scale degrees 1, flat 7, 6, raised 7, and 1. And then following convention, Haydn gives it to us twice in a row. When I play it, notice that the first chord on the screen is actually the tonic of an authentic cadence, the last authentic cadence in the whole piece. Here's another one from a violin sonata that Mozart wrote when he was 8 years old. Let that sink in for a second. Now, once again, we've got the cue line right on top, but now the odd numbered notes are embellished with little turn figures. We've got scale degree 1, flat 7, then 6, then raised 7, and finally tonic again. And then, of course, a second pass through the same music. And once again, I'll start the recording just before the first chord so you can hear that it's part of an authentic cadence. Years old. Well, our next one is by Beethoven, who was not 8 years old when he wrote it. This is from the song Mignonne, and we've just cadenced here in F sharp major, and there's a cue line in the top of the piano. And of course, as per convention, we get it twice. So let's back up and hear the music that leads into that final cadence.
Mit dir mein geliebter Ziel. Dahin.
Our last closing quiescenza is also Beethoven from his 8th violin sonata, but this one is a lot less generic sounding than the last three. The cue line is still easy to hear, but now it's in an inner voice. And by putting it there, Beethoven leaves room for an attractive countermelody in the piano right hand. He also leaves a gap between the two quiescenzas where the two instruments move toward each other in contrary motion. So here's how the whole thing sounds. So now on to the opening quiescenzas, which are often quite different from the closing type. They tend to occur once rather than twice. They're less likely, much less likely, to put the cue line in the foreground, and they're much more likely to be memorable or thematic rather than generic. And finally, they often don't emphasize all 5 chords equally like the closing ones do. So, after saying all this, my first example, the opening of Bach's 4th Cello Suite, is actually pretty similar to a closing quiescenza. The chords are all equally spaced, right? They change every 2 bars, and it starts with a really audible cue line. The top line is 1, flat 7 to 6. But then instead of going to raise 7 and 1, Bach breaks it off and leaps down to finish on scale degrees 4 and 3. Still, I don't think you'll have any trouble at all hearing it as a quiescenza. The next one is also by Bach. It also happens to be in E flat major, but it's a lot less formulaic. So it's more of a real opening quiescenza. The first thing to notice is that the functions aren't spaced equally. Predominant, dominant, and the closing tonic all get a whole bar to themselves, but the opening tonic and the 5, 7, and 4 have to share a bar. This happens all the time, and it makes sense because if you think about it, 5, 7, and 4 is really just a tonic chord with an extra note, the lowered scale degree 7 or D flat here. So when we listen, notice that there's no trace of a cue line here at all, in the sense that some simple stepwise voice holds everything together. This is a very complicated texture with call and response between the two hands, which trade off this one motive back and forth in every bar. So you're going to need to listen with a little more effort here, even to notice that this is a quiescenza. Okay, one more Bach. This is the opening of the two-part invention number 14 in B flat, and it's a lot like the last example. It's one chord per bar, except that 5, 7, and 4 has to share a bar with the opening tonic. But that bar is mostly tonic. Lowered 7 only turns up in the last 16th note of the bar. And once again, because the opening is all about playing with a motive that spans a full octave, we're not going to get anything like the simple cue lines from the closing quiescenzas. So now let's jump ahead 100 years to what might be one of the most famous quiescenzas of all time, the opening of the Schubert song that most people know as Ave Maria. This one's a little more regular in terms of harmonic rhythm. The opening tonic holds for 3 beats, but then after that, every chord other than tonic gets exactly 1 beat. And this one does have a really important stepwise upper voice, but it's different from the standard cue line. Look at the top note of each arpeggio in the right hand. We start by going up in thirds, scale degrees 3, 5, and lowered 7. Then we descend chromatically through scale degree 6, then flat 6, which is part of a 7 diminished 7 chord, and then finally back to scale degree 5. Here's how the whole thing sounds. Now that is Schubert showing us just how lovely a quiescenza can be. So beautiful. Who is she? If I fall, will she catch me? If she leaves, will she take me with her? Wow. Okay. Look, I don't know what you think you saw just now, but listen, I'm a professional doing his job, okay? So let's please try to stay focused on the task at hand rather than, say, judging people or prying into their personal, whatevers. Are we good with that? Okay, good. Let's move on. The next one I've got lined up is from Mozart's Magic Flute. This is the opening of the Queen of the Night's first aria. And if you follow the tenor voice, you'll see exactly the same pattern as the top voice in Schubert's Ave Maria, and in the same key. It starts by arpeggiating up through scale degrees 3, 5, and flat 7, and then descends chromatically down to scale degree 5. What's interesting, though, is that the functions line up differently. The first 4 are the same. It's tonic, tonic, 5, 7, 4, and then 4. But when lowered 6 goes to 5, Mozart gives us predominant moving to dominant. that's not what Schubert did with those two notes. He had dominant going to tonic. So here, Mozart's actually not done with the with the progression until the next system, when we finally get tonic. Then it's all just 1 and 5s till the final cadence. Have a listen. So I want to wrap up this section with two pieces that have particularly sneaky instances of, this progression we've been listening for. The progression's there, but in both cases it goes by really fast and basically just gets upstaged by the melody. The first one is from Beethoven's Harp Quartet, and the only thing that really tips you off that there's a you-know-what here is that flat 7 in the melody. Notice as well that Beethoven brings the tune back immediately in the viola. That's the red melody in the middle of the texture, but this time puts a real bass line underneath it. And with that moving bass line, it's no longer, you know what. So the whole thing sounds like this. And the next one is from the opening of Mozart's K488 Piano Concerto. We've got a 3-bar, a 3-bar thing, followed by a little plagal tag, a subdominant function at the end. For me, this is the least obvious you-know-what that we'll hear today, and when we listen, pay special attention to this harmony. It comes about when Mozart suspends the entire tonic chord over scale degree 4 in the bass, making this sonority that accidentally sounds like Aaron Copland or something. It's really beautiful. Okay, so our last piece of business today is to... Okay, can we just rewind for a second? I admit, a moment ago, I called that one chord beautiful, but I think we need to stop overusing that word. I mean, don't you think we should be saving the idea of beauty for those really transcendent moments when something touches you just once and you know you'll never be the same again? When a vision descends that never fades, never wavers, until there's nothing left but longing, and you're torn by an ecstasy that burns and an agony that thrills. The two of them coiling ever tighter, entwining and consuming. I'm good. I'm okay. We're almost there, folks. Stay with me. Our last thing today is to look at a few... Damn it! Sorry. Our last thing today is to look at a few you-know-whats in minor. This is an opening you-know-what from the Magic Flute, and it's hard to hear because the chords get progressively shorter. Tonic gets a whole bar, but then 5, 7, and 4 gets a half bar, 4 gets 2 eighth notes, and 7, diminished 7, gets only 1 eighth note. This is the character Pamina singing, "Ah, I feel it, it has disappeared, love's happiness is gone forever." I feel you, kid. The next one is a closing thing, you know, from Mozart's C minor piano concerto. The movement ends with 15 bars of tonic pedal, starting with a very dissonant you-know-what, thanks to a bunch of fully diminished seventh chords. And then Mozart tightens things up to just tonic and dominant, one per bar. Here's the whole thing. And finally, against all odds, our last example. This is the main theme of Beethoven's Pathetique Sonata. And as you can see, there's a long tonic pedal through the first system. And above that, we find two unusual you-know-whats. They're unusual because they repeat their second and third chords. And then finally, the bass rises by step into the cadence. We've got this. I can do this. I'm sorry, folks. Maybe it's time to just let this go. It's funny. You know what pathetique means, don't you? It means pitiable, heartbreaking. Beethoven was the expert, I guess. But I know a thing or two about suffering as well. And I also know this. I have to be with her. She calls out to me, and 1,000 sails unfurl. But then there's only us. Oh, just to fix her gaze is to cast off every earthly care. To stroke her fur is to feel flesh melt into spirit. But to say her name is to taste eternity. I'm fine! Everything's fine!